Well, welcome to today's gathering for the CREO Collective. We've got my friend Jeff from the Way Between with us today. Jeff did a Camino recently, and out of that experience, kind of the idea around today's webinar was birthed. So grateful that you guys are on the call, and for those of you who will be watching this afterwards. So I'm going to pray for us, give Jeff a quick intro, and then we'll get started because he's got some great stuff for us today. And we'll do our usual conversational approach to processing transition, particularly for ministry leaders in the various stages of our lives. And then we'll save our kind of offline question towards the end process. So Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather together today. Thank you for the technology that makes it possible. Thank you that Jeff's carved time out of his busy day to be with us. Thank you for each of my brothers on the call. We ask that your Holy Spirit would fill every nook and cranny of what's going to go on, open our hearts to hear from you. Thank you for the skill set and the anointing that you've given to Jeff. Thank you for the questions that are kind of burbling up already in a number of us, and we ask that you would help us together to discern what it is that you have for us as we move forward in faithfulness. In Jesus' name, amen. So I just briefly kind of intro Jeff a couple minutes ago. He and his wife, Sarah, who's a lot easier on the eyes and maybe even more anointed than he is, for sure. They operate this Way Between ministry. He's going to give us a little bit of a brief on that in just a few. But Jeff is a missiologist, missionary equipper, kingdom leader, long-term missionary in Spain with Novo. Some of you are familiar with them, have friends serving with them. So Jeff's back in the States now, out of the greater Denver area, doing some really good work here, and we're grateful. I know I can speak for the leadership team and say we're grateful that he's here to process this topic with us. That is certainly germane to CREO, particularly as Mike is trying to move through a transition right now, and some of you on this call are as well. So with that, Jeff, why don't you launch into it? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's process transition together.
Awesome. Total privilege to be here. Thanks, guys, for showing up for this. Just a few weeks ago, I was dragging my butt and Foye's butt and Dale's butt along the northern coast of Spain, along a chunk of the Camino de Santiago. It's not only a joy and a pleasure to do that, but it's also something that we offer. A unique kind of venue that we offer from the Way Between, groups of guys, groups of women, doing chunks of the Camino and walking it out. Like those who are in major transition, those are doing sabbatical, that kind of thing, actually walking out, getting in that space with the Lord and actually exercising, listening to the Lord, listening to each other, praying over each other, while walking the journey out. So that was something that we got to experience together. You can imagine being 7 days straight on long hikes with Foye. There was lots of laughs and times where I wanted to wrestle him into the bushes, but I restrained, and and lots of fun. So anyway, yeah, a little bit just kind of what's unique about the Way Between. I'll start with that and then give a little backstory as to how we even got to, Sarah and I got to leading this thing called the Way Between. So basically we focus on ministry leaders, and we use that term quite broadly. That's any flavor or doing any kind of gig. We're quite ecumenical. We just last year served 35 different denominational backgrounds or organizational backgrounds. That's ministry leaders stateside or working globally, working in the local church, more traditional roles, working outside the local church with unique callings and visions that the Lord has given you. And so what's unique is we work with ministry leaders in the major transition times. So that could be going into the ministry, that could be transitioning to a different kind of ministry or a different kind of post, that could be doing reentry after living globally for years and learning how to do life in the US again. That could be sabbaticals. Sabbaticals don't always overlap with a major transition, but we find that majority of the time they do. And usually we don't know what the Lord's going to do with us when we go into a sabbatical season. And we find that the Lord does do a lot of change, even if that's just internal transition. And we end up staying in the same role that we're in. And then alongside of that, that tailors with that is vocational discernment. So I love Jesus. What I'm doing, I feel miserable in, what's wrong, what's off. How do we pick that apart? How do we do good vocational transition? We do that in a group discernment way where you bring alongside you your trusted mentors and prayer people. And we do a process of putting you in different spaces with the Lord to figure out, okay, where is my kingdom fit? You know, how do I live out this heart I have? But how do I do it in a way that makes sense for how God's gifted me and the talents that he's given me, the experience he's given me, my testimony, that kind of thing. So those are the expressions that we do. That's the unique ministry we do. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been going for 3 years now since we landed in Denver in the middle of COVID after 9 years in Spain doing global ministry. And you can imagine that was quite a transition unto itself. In fact, we're sitting on our patio and having dinner the other night, and I pulled up the transition list that I created. And we actually finally signed off on it, that we had completed, you know, the 42 big rocks from communication rollout to finding a new car to finding a place to live to, you know, getting my little TCK kids into American school and navigating that to, you know, getting insurances changed and driver's licenses and, you know, raising all the funds to do the support raising, you know, to make the transition. And, you know, you can imagine all those pieces if you guys have been through a major move. It took 3 years, you know, and during a crazy time when the world was scratching its head and falling apart and a lot of people were grieving. We wouldn't recommend as transition experts to do that during a time like that. The Lord had us do that during that time, and we couldn't get away from that. But yeah, so here we are 3 years into official 501c3, but really Sarah has been the driver on this. She's the CEO of the Way Between, and she took a sabbatical and actually departed from the team that we were on with Novo about 7 years ago while we were in Spain. So I stayed on the team. We were in the same community. You can imagine navigating that transition. She did her own sabbatical, and it was out of that time with the Lord and her own like recovery from burnout and the things that he led her into that have become the foundation of the Way Between and how we do ministry. So a couple of unique approaches would be helpful to talk about a couple of unique approaches at this point, Foye.
Yeah, I just was going to ask you or kind of frame this. We've got a number of people like you and probably can identify in your story, Jeff, that they're leaving traditional Christian ministry, full-time vocational situations to do innovative and entrepreneurial stuff. We've got Jared, who's doing a church-errant after being a long-term Foursquare pastor. Harry's doing chaplaincy and some other innovative things with tech after being a long-term pastor, and others on the call too. Folks that are trying to transition into or back into the mission field. Can you share a little bit, maybe even from your own story in a pithy way, about how difficult that was, what precipitated that for you, and then how you've kind of found your fit to a greater degree doing what you're doing with your wife in what we would call kind of an apostolic fashion.
Yeah. So there's a few pieces. I'll just kind of like do a bullet point, and if they don't all tie together, feel free to write some questions down that we can hit later. Right out of doing a quick scan over some of the historical things right out of college. I actually got married to college sweetheart, and we headed to Korea to do mission work together. Had a couple of years there, and it was the kind of thing where I didn't know the word contextualization, but it was the kind of thing where the group that we were with had good hearts, and we saw the Lord moving more despite us rather than through us. But it was like after a couple of years, we realized there's got to be a better way to do ministry than what's going on here in the mission field, at least in this category, in this area. And it was a challenging time. We actually went to Fuller Seminary from there to kind of figure out how to do ministry better. My wife had a call to do Bible teaching. I had a heart and a call towards mission, and we needed a seminary that would affirm her as a woman and also had a good MDiv program and a good mission program. So that narrowed it to about 3 seminaries at the time. And so we ended up at Fuller, and long story short, she went through a major psychological breakdown. She had some burnout from the field. She had a lot of stuff from her past that hadn't been dealt with. And in the midst of that, and that spiraling downward, there was actually some infidelity and just things that blew up the marriage. Some of it was stress from the field. Some of it was not. Some of it was stuff that we brought to the field and brought back, right? But that ended up being a really difficult time. I went to try to get a 2-year degree, ended up at seminary for 9 years and taking 4 years off in the middle there, not caring about ministry and just trying to hold life together. Had some people that supported me and walked me through it. She ended up kind of leaving her faith, leaving the church, and leaving the marriage at the same time. And I went through a very messy divorce that I didn't choose, and went through about 4 years of counseling and what I called the dark days, and learned a lot about myself, grew, matured myself as well. But it was one of those things at a very early age. We see things like this blow apart in the 40s, couples in their 30s and 40s, for whatever reason, went through that in mid-20s. And but it reframed a lot of things. So as the Lord started to warm my heart back up to ministry again, and to him, and to a call and that kind of thing, it was in the midst of that this whole member care area started to be sort of coined. And that's sort of a mix of leadership training as well as leadership care, crisis intervention, sort of the missing piece of, all right, let's get the next generation into ministry or to the field and rah, and all of that's good. But if the training is not there, and then the ongoing training and the ongoing support care is not in place, whether that's in a denomination or in an organization, that we just see the attrition levels of people coming out of the ministry are just horrible. They're astronomical. If you floated that against a business model, the church, as a business should be belly up by now. It should not be operating. So obviously there's some grace of the Lord, and it's, not the church's job. It's the Lord's mission, right? But at the same time, there's some correctives that this whole member care has been a response, or a pendulum swing, saying, how do we provide better training, better care, ongoing support resources? So that was kind of the new call that the Lord led me into. I met Sarah years later at seminary at Fuller. That's where we actually connected. And the Lord did a lot of grace and healing and redemption, both for her and her personal life, but for me in us getting to know each other in that member care group. And then later, we started dating, and the Lord blessed it, and we got married. joined Novo shortly after finishing our missiology degrees. We did the missiology program and the leadership development track at Fuller. We both come with very different personalities and different giftings, but a similar call to similar areas, and have been learning how to navigate that through marriage, right? And communication and personalities and everything. But it was during that time too, at Fuller, that I ran into guys like Alan Hirsch and Ryan Bolger, and did a emphasis on postmodern missions and postmodern church. Was a part of a group called Tribe LA in downtown LA that was basically a landing space, a communal gathering for those who were in the industry, whether that was film or music, and didn't want to darken the door of the traditional church, but wanted to work on their spirituality. And that was a place led by some Fuller pastors where people could come and ask the hard questions and beat on African drums and learn about Christ through a non-threatening means. I was part of that for a while. And then coming into Novo, rubbing shoulders with guys like Hugh Halter and, some of the out of the box thinking, where is the ball moving? Like, how do we be relevant? How do we be open with the forms, but stay true to the meaning of Scripture, and not hold so tightly to preserving the denominational flavors, as a mission. And so it was in times like that, in places like that, really got to think more outside the box missionally. So yeah, joining this member care team, we joined the team. They wanted to be regionally located to be more accessible, particularly to those doing very hard work in hard contexts, North Africa, Middle East, Europe. We positioned ourselves right on the outskirts of that. We were a member care team providing training and care. And we did that for 9 years with them. They were a great team. They're still there. Love them. Stay in touch with them. They're, to their credit, they were trying to do 20 different things, and about 5 of them well. And Sarah and I sat more on the developmental side, more of the training, the coaching, the where is God taking you side. And we had a lot of, counselors and all that were sitting on the care. Over the years, that team moved more into a care function, which was great. And Sarah and I do care. We are pastoral counselors. We've got a psych background. We're not therapists, licensed therapists, but we say we care, but not that much. No, just kidding. We do care, but we want to see people not just kind of heal and come up to present, but to say, okay, so where is God moving you? Like, why did he take you through this? And what does that mean then for where he's moving you? And that, kind of coming up to present and, making, finding those areas of healing and reconciliation and all that is good, but they often are a developmental stepping stone to where God's taking you next in kingdom impact. So that's the area we get excited about being a part of, is that developmental side. So.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions here, Jeff, kind of tagging onto that. And I know some of the people are probably thinking these things. How do you know when it's time to transition? Number one, from your current context. And for those people who have deconstructed and have out processed, myself included, I mean, when you're in that space for so long, there's a grief process that you walk through. How do you handle that as someone who coaches leaders in transition to move from where you have been more robustly into where you are, and allow God to use you in a more robust way?
Yeah. Great question. And this one's a harder one to answer. A couple of things that we see as patterns. Sometimes there's something major that happens that forces you into transition. It could be collapse of a ministry, loss of a job. You have to move. One of the things that for us was part of our discernment of it was time to leave Spain was parent care. Both sets of parents' health started to really decline. and we were half a globe away. And, we don't have perfect relationships with our parents. They're complicated, but we felt the Lord saying it's time to move back and have some, not only more involvement in their life, but also to come alongside them in that care and have some quality time. So that was sort of one of the dominoes that triggered it for us. And then it was the discernment of, okay, do I stay on the team from a distance? And that didn't make sense. And we actually had a group discernment process of mentors and trusted people that came alongside of us and helped us to figure out those dominoes. Sometimes it's, like I said, you love Jesus, you want to make a kingdom impact, but where you're sitting is just miserable and you're trying to figure out why it's miserable. If you sit there too long, kind of our human condition, we start finding places and things to blame or people to blame, why it's not good for you or whatever, when we can actually, my challenge is to take some leadership and some ownership for that and say, what's off? Am I sitting in a place where I'm gifted in this and called to that? And I look at my weekly, dispersion of time and energy, and I'm doing that 20% of the time. And 80% of the time I'm doing other stuff that might be good and might be helpful to the ministry, but it's not really in your sweet spot. It's not really in your zone. And we've seen this, whether you're Christian or not, in the workplace. If you're in a place that you're wired for, that you are actually, is life-giving for you, and you're sitting in a place where it's more like 50-50, then your burnout rate is going to be somewhere in the 3 to 6 year window. So whether that's ministry and, you got the vision of the Lord behind it or not, about 3 to 6 years down the road, if you're sitting at 50-50 or less than that, as far as a life-giving fit with what you're doing, you're going to find a holy discontentment starting to rise in you. You're going to find a reason to leave, or your performance is going to start, dropping, and they will find a way for you to move on, unless there is some time to stop and you actually take some stock of what's going on, and either look at moving yourself more to like an 80-20 fit. Okay, the reality when the rubber meets the road is at least 20% of the time we got to do those little things so that the 80% can happen. Okay, there's not really 100% fit out there this side of heaven. But if you can move yourself, negotiate yourself towards a 70-30, 80-20 fit, that's something you could do for years. If the Lord has you there, that can be a life-giving fit. Now, that is a challenge for us who are doing, carving new trails outside of the local, traditional pastor or missionary roles, worship pastor, those kind of things. We are often wearing, at least at the beginning, all the hats. I currently, 3 years in, am not in an 80-20 fit, even though, I talk about this stuff. I'm moving closer to it, and we actually have a strategic plan to get both of ourselves there within a few years. And we know where we're headed, but right now, I'm the accountant. I'm the, I'm the marketing expert for TWB. We have a handful of volunteers and a handful of subcontractors. But, when you're carving new paths in church and ministry, for a while there, you will wear more hats. But if you're aware of what hats you need to try to offload first, then you know where to put the focus on delegating, on partners who come alongside you, on those who are partnering with you in the ministry, and it gives you focus on how to move yourself into that life-giving fit. So yeah, that holy discontent thing, it's hard to ignore. Sometimes it's the Lord pushing you out of that next nest into something bigger or something different. And sometimes it's a sign of, okay, there was the chance when I first saw the job description or when I first launched into this thing, but something's off, and then trying to tease that out and say, are there ways that I can reduce some of these things that are life draining, and get more in the neutral and life-giving zone. If I want to be sustaining in this ministry and sustaining in this impact. Yeah. And one of the sad things, just the last part of it, is that whether you're church, whether you're stateside, or whether you're working globally, sometimes it takes longer in the global context because you maybe are learning language and systems and all that, but it takes an average of 4 to 5 years to start seeing a new initiative get some momentum and take some growth. So if you're burning out in that 4 to 5 year window because you're not in the right fit, then just, it's sad. We see it all the time. Just as the momentum is starting, you've got a leader that is really burning out and not able to keep going the distance. But there can be some real pieces of ownership and wisdom that you can take in that process so that you can see yourself, push past that and move on in that sustainability alongside the ministry that you've been putting so much sweat and tears into.
Thanks for that, Jeff.
Yeah.
What are, when a car is running low on oil or having some sort of internal problem that starts to redline, what are some things that we should be looking for that are redline indicators so that we don't blow up or burn out?
Yeah. Sometimes that holy discontent feel, can be an indicator. A lot of times it's for people, they start, the accumulated stress always manifests physically some point along the line. That's just how we're built. That's how God built us. So a lot of times some early indicators might be trouble sleeping when you didn't have trouble sleeping before. Find yourself waking up, bing, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., mind is racing. You're trying to figure out either all the details of stuff you need to do, or that interpersonal conflict with the team, or, that kind of thing. The stress starts affecting your sleep and some of your main functions for refueling. You might have, things like ulcers, or you might have things like quick breathing, or even small or major kind of like panic attack breathing things. Those are signs that our systems are getting low and on fumes. One of the things is I'm a fairly healthy extrovert, and when I'm healthy and in a good place, then I'm enjoying people and getting fuel from that, and also making sure I get my time, separate to refuel. But I start avoiding people. I start becoming a real introvert. I start withdrawing. I get very grumpy, short on patience, snap with the kids a lot easier. Things like that are indicators to me that something's off and that something's wearing down. And one of the things we talk about is the difference between rest or some of those refreshment pieces and renewal. And the difference between those two. And actually God gives us patterns for both of those. So patterns of Sabbath and that kind of thing, stopping sometime once a weekish, and making sure that you stop the work, even if you love it and even if it's great, stop the work and actually get some rest and some refreshment, some time with the Lord, time with family. That kind of thing is super important. That can't be neglected. Those are refreshments and those are good, but we also need those occasional times for deeper, longer breadth and depth to actually get the renewal. We can still kind of run out the tank, even though we're doing some refreshments. We need those times and those patterns of renewal, whether that's sabbatical, whether that's a quarterly or every 6 month spiritual retreat for a handful of days. Whether that's, habits that you have, hobbies that you have, like hiking or camping or whatever, refuels you. Having those rhythms for renewal as well are important to keeping us going. So those help to waylay some of the lights coming on the dashboard. And then, taking a full-on sabbatical, we recommend every 7 to 10 years. Some people do mini sabbaticals, like every 5 years, do a few months every 5 years. There's not a perfect rhyme or reason to it, but that gives you a longer break to not only recuperate, but then actually do some deeper reflection, to grow in the Lord, to get some new focus and clarity on your giftings, and then go back with refreshed energy, vision, eyes on what you're doing. So does that help, Foye?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people on this call are not in professional ministry where they're drawing a paycheck, Jeff, and they just can't take, they're not going to go to a church elder board and say, I need 3 to 6 months off. That's just not feasible. They'll be lucky if they get their 2 or 3 weeks off a year, right?
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with marketplace leaders who want to be faithful to the gospel, how do we incorporate these refreshment, renewal rhythms in a way that's accessible, but allows people to decompress and discern so that those red dashboard lights don't come on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where it really takes, some conversation, with each unique situation and dispersion of work and those kind of things that we're doing. I've had several sabbatical clients, ministry leaders that had to work while they were doing it, with their ministry is maybe a 2/3 or a chunk of what they do, or maybe half of what they do, but they're bivocational, they're co-vocational, and they've had to keep up the paycheck work while figuring out how to delegate or have somebody else continue at least maintaining what's going on in the ministry work. And so there's no shame in that. That definitely can be effective, to set down one half or the other half for a chunk of time, and to look at how you can do that manageably and sustainably. So it's not an all or nothing. It's not I could never just pull away from everything, so I could never take a sabbatical. I'd like to challenge that thinking, and there are lots of creative ways to get some of that renewal period that you can do. Right now in the we're still in what we feel like is kind of startup, moving into maintaining mode with the nonprofit here. Instead of doing every 7-year sabbatical, we're looking at, Sarah pulling away next year for a 3-month period in our least busy time. I'm training some of our volunteers to help fill in those pieces, and she's not gonna fully pull away. She's going to be doing some writing and some different things as well. So it's not the ideal of, complete sabbatical pull away, but it's going to be short. And we're going to do shorter seasons of that every few years as we're building things. And we have some side gig stuff that we do to make ends meet and pay the bills. So.
Yeah, awesome. I love just kind of the phrase came to mind, reimagining sabbatical. Reimagining, developing rhythms of refreshment and renewal. So I love what you're saying there, that it doesn't have to be, like Mike. I mean, many of these people on the call know my friend Mike Gerald. So he and I talked today. He called me. He's like, I'm not feeling like I'm doing a very good job on my sabbatical today because I cut the grass and listen to a bunch of podcasts. So, it's almost like we've got this thing, almost like medieval Catholic scholastic kind of understanding that you've got to move to the monastery and just pray all day. But there's flexibility here when we talk about developing these rhythms and recognizing our need for a sabbatical process for creativity and a kind of entrepreneurial thought to enter into that, which this group is great with.
Right.
Having said that, I know you have a tool, and I'm looking at the time.
Yeah.
Friends, I wanted to do something a little bit different today. Jeff excels at the practical. So he prayed and came up with a tool that he wanted to kind of introduce to us. And in CREO, we're all about putting tools in our toolboxes. It's going to take about 10 minutes tops to move through this. Are you good with him taking us through this tool? And then we'll have the last 15 minutes for questions. If so, could you just give me a thumbs up?
Awesome.
Okay, awesome. So Jeff, 10 minutes on the tool, man. Let's go.
Yeah, cool. All right, so I wanted to give you something practical. Like we can talk about rest and reflection and transition and all that. And I do have some like, some key tips for healthy transition, stuff like that. I'm happy to share that, either in the chat or afterwards on an email. I'll do a little dump of some of those. But this is what we're working out of. This is a workbook that Sarah put out. It's got 40 plus tools. The different blocks that we arrange different ways depending on who we're working on. All of these are developmental based. Some of them are simple ways to posture yourself before the Lord in new ways maybe you haven't before. Some of them engage your body in exercise and art in ways like that. When you're in transition and in stressful phases, the Lord designed us with some techniques for survival, which are great, but they're also not helpful sometimes when we need to make big decisions or new discernment or new vocational decisions and that kind of thing. So we often end up living at about 10% of ourselves, frontal lobe, cognitive, spin cycle. We're trying to figure it all out. We're making 1,000 decisions a day because we're in transition. And these tools, and this particular tool fits into that, helps us stop and set that down for a second, take a step back, engage the rest of us, engage our creativity, our body, and then come back to the decision making. And this is all backed up by neuroscience and different things like that, where we actually come back, we're much more at peace, we're breathing deeper, we're more present, and we're able to sit with the Lord and engage and actually make clearer, wiser decisions and hear from the Lord more clearly. And so that's what all these tools go for. This is like kind of our content base behind some of the transition cohorts and all that. So today what we're going to do is look at a tool called the self-care wheel. I dropped it in the chat. Okay, if you're able to download it or in your place where you want to download it and look at it that way, or even print it out so you can write on it. It's a workbook tool. You can do that. If you just have a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and you want to pull that out, I'll lead you through it. Here's the backdrop on this one. So leadership guru Bobby Clinton, you may have recognized that name. He's a Fuller leadership prof, runs the leadership program there. He'll tell you that he is not a great author. And if you read his books, they can tend to be a little dry. What he is good is he's a master researcher. And so this comes out of some of his research that got published sort of in a research format, but never took life in a practical way. Well, me and some of my colleagues put this into a tool that we can actually use to do an assessment on ourselves as leaders at any point in time, to help get a gauge on where are the lights on the dashboard, how are we doing, how is our sustainability, and that's the self-care wheel. So basically the backdrop, he and his research associates looked over the lives of thousands of leaders, from biblical leaders to historical leaders, church history, current day leaders, and they created basically like a leadership timeline for each of these people, men and women, and started to say, what patterns do we see? Is there anything that we can discern as far as like best practices for leadership and sustainability? And they started to see that there were kind of like 3 distinct groups. Now, all of these leaders had a great kingdom impact. They're known, a lot of them, you know the names of these leaders. And they started to see that there were 3 distinct groups. There was the first group, had a great impact, but it was kind of that 3 to 5 year, hit the wall, burned out. Sometimes there was unavoidable things that took them out of their kingdom impact, but it was short-lived. Impact was great, but it was short-lived. There was a second group that kind of went the distance into retirement, had an impact, closed up shop, and sort of collapsed over the line. And then there was a third group, similarly, that had a long-standing impact, whether that was in different ministry things, it wasn't always in the same, vein. But upon kind of retiring and passing over the line, they left a growing legacy that continued to grow above and beyond themselves. after their years. And so there was an insight, there was a mentoring, there was something that continued to grow beyond that. So they were like, okay, so there's these three groups. All of them had impact. There's lessons to take from each. But then they started to say, well, what's the difference? Is there any difference that we can see between these groups? And that's where these areas of the self-care wheel come out, because they realize there's 6 distinct facets of life that were with the first group who kind of burned out early. They saw that a lot of those facets of their life were in a disempowering or a liability phase a lot of the time. And for those who kind of went the distance and left a growing legacy, whether they were intentional with or not, maybe they just had the privilege of some of those things provided for them. A lot of these facets of their life were more in the empowering or in the solid phase. Now, none of them were perfect. None of them had all their ducks in a row for all seasons of their life. So that's not the point of it. And we don't need to get, type 1 about it on the Enneagram and say there's a right way to do it and there's only one way to do it. But what this does is gives you a quick assessment on your own life in these 6 facets of life to help you know, okay, what is solid, what is empowering, what is moving me forward well, and what's dragging me down? What could take me out of the game if I'm not careful? Are there some areas I can be intentional and ask the Lord to give me creative thoughts in how to make those areas more sustainable so that I can continue doing what I love? I can continue doing what the Lord has called me to. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at right now. All right. So first, I'd like you to draw a line. If you're doing the downloads, it's part 1, self-care wheel part 1. Draw a line on your paper, and this is a continuum line, simple continuum line. Okay, one side is disempowering, and then as you move across the continuum, it gets into the liability, not quite as disempowering, solid, and then empowering, like really solid and in place and doing well. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read for you these 6 areas, and I'd like you to mark on your line, where do you feel like these sit currently? Kind of the health of where they're at currently. Okay. So first is physical needs, the most easy to kind of discern. Physical needs in your life. Do you have what you need to be healthily eating, sleeping, clothed, cared for, the basics of life? Are you settled in where you're living? Okay, now if you're in major transition, probably not, right? And that's okay, because that's part of the transition. If you've got kids to care for, are you in a fairly safe environment, even if you're, working in an area that has higher risk? Okay, so physical needs, where would you put yourself on the continuum? Is that disempowering? Is that in a liability phase? Is that solid, or is that empowering? If you don't have to think about it much, it's probably more solid or empowering. All right, second area.
There you go.
Emotional, social support. Okay, you could just use the word emotional. Are there people who I can and do share my thoughts and feelings with? Do I have empathic listeners in my life, and I am engaging with them on a regular basis? Okay, it doesn't have to be persons in your direct ministry or ministry team. It could be spouse, it could be friends, it could be professionals, it could be spiritual director, counselor, whatever. Do you have that kind of outlet and that kind of social support? And just be honest with yourself. There's no shame in this. Some of these might be in the disempowering, and that's okay. Three is the financial. This is often a challenging one for those of us in ministry. But are your basic needs met adequately? Are they covered financially? Do you have a clear and realistic budget? And are you sticking to it? Are you actually thinking future forward and thinking about what investment in the future or stability in the future looks like? Okay. If you're in a new startup or in a place where it's tough to make ends meet each month, it's okay to say, hey, it's in the liability phase right now, but we're praying and hoping that things move in the right direction. But whether you're bringing in a little or bringing in a lot, we can be responsible with the way we handle our money, have a budget, be following it, have a plan, that kind of thing. Okay. Fourth one, spiritual vitality. Surprisingly, and this might be true for you guys, but surprisingly, working with pastors and missionaries and ministry folks, this one often scores the lowest. Spiritual vitality. Am I actively developing my spiritual life? Do I feel close or far away from my Creator in this season? Am I involved in life-giving community that helps me to mature in my faith walk? For some of us sitting in between the deconstruction and the reconstruction, you know, the desire and the need for community is there, but sometimes that finding of that community that can just be honest and authentic and walk through this kind of season, it is tough. We're sitting in that right now. So it might feel more liability, and that's okay to be honest about that.
We want to leave time for some questions too, Jeff. So could we move through these last couple real quick?
Last two. Okay. Vocational fulfillment. Okay, this is kind of that 50-50, 80-20 type of thing. How does my life and work have meaning? Do I receive feedback on my work? Am I developing? Do you feel like you're in a sweet spot fit? Okay. Where does that sit for you right now? You could be thinking in the kind of terms of the last 2 to 3 months, you know, if you need a season marker. All right, lastly, emotional play. This is one we don't often think about. And this one often scores really low with those in ministry because, shoot, we're called by the Creator to do something awesome and we get really serious about it, and that's all good and great. But we also have been put on this earth and we've been given people around us, and we've been given hobbies, and we can play and relax and put the ministry hat off now and then and just enjoy life. If you read Ecclesiastes, that's the main message that we were given. Are you regularly enjoying some life-giving hobbies, sport, play, art, playing with the kids? Is that part of your regular routine? And it doesn't always have to be for the purpose of ministry. All right. So you got a sense of the 6? Okay. So I'll leave part 2 for you guys to put that into the wheel form and see how full each of those pie pieces of your wheel are. And if you think about, okay, I'm rolling down the road on wheels that look like this, and your wheel is all lopsided, okay, that's probably about how life feels right now, right? But if your wheel's fairly full, you know, then you're going to be rolling a lot more smoothly. All right. So take some time to think through these and ask yourself, Lord, is there anything you want to show me? Is there any creative ways that you can help me move some of these liability areas more up into the solid? Are there supports and resources that I need to be able to do that, whether that's a book or a professional or a financial consultant or a spiritual director? Or do I just need to set the ministry thing down at 5 p.m. every day and go play with the kids? Is that going to make a big difference for me? Okay, so think about that. And I want to just reiterate, it's not about perfection on this. Okay, it's about seeking to get things into the solid or the empowering, but there's certain seasons of our lives that no matter what we do, that's going to sit on that liability line. But if the rest are in a good place, they're going to help pull that up and sustain that. Okay. So think about, these are things that we can take ownership as leaders in ministry to make sure that we're at the most sustainable place as we can. All of these
Awesome.
are by the Lord, but I wanted to give you something to chew on, something to take with you that could help you guys be more sustainable and do what you love for longer.
Thanks,
Good.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got some time left for questions. If you haven't downloaded those tools out of the chat, go ahead and do that. Super helpful, highly recommend them. If you have a question, just kind of unmute. Don't ask a question that's going to require 10 minutes to answer. We want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak here. Okay, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, you drop the record. Yeah, just drop the record before you start questions.